Hey guys, got a bit of a tricky one. I'm not quite sure about it myself, and I'm going to be talking about it in really simplified generalizations. Okay, so as often I do with these sorts of topics, because not every case is the same, not every person is the same. So when we talk about Japanese society or stuff in Japan, quite often we have to generalize. So, but it's the difference between, in Japan, the difference between fantasy and reality and image, and the ability for us to recognize the difference. So anybody that spent a period of time in Japan will recognize some of this stuff I'm going to talk about. So first of all, the fantasy stuff, it's abundant in Japan. I mean, go to any convenience store and you'll see a line of guys standing at the magazine rack reading through manga and total world of fantasy. You know, manga and anime, hugely popular in Japan and just massively fantasized. You know, most manga and anime is just super fantasy stuff. So the fantasy's easy to find in Japan. There's lots of fantasy, you know, anime, manga, TV, commercials, TV commercials, advertising. You know, fantasy's abundant in Japan, and some of it's fairly extreme. You know, there's mainstream fantasy, you know, Miyazaki anime, mainstream fantasy, and then you've got all sorts of other stuff. You've got hentai stuff. You know, there's always someone in the comments on my videos. There's always someone who mentions tentacle rape or, you know, some bizarre stuff like that. That's the fantasy stuff in Japan. And I've had a whole lot of examples of where I've raised topics with Japanese people and said, what about this? You know, AKB48, you know, a bunch of, the image is supposed to be they're all high school girls. They're not all high school girls, but the image is supposed to be that they're high school girls. And I've raised the topic before about that with people and said, in some of the interviews as well, and said, you know, what is it about the schoolgirl thing and guys, you know, fantasizing about the schoolgirl thing? Is that okay? And they say, yes, it is, because it's fantasy. It's not reality. So basically in Japan, the society is generally very accepting of fantasy, no matter how bent and twisted it is, providing it's only fantasy. So I know in a lot of other societies, if you know, like grown men having fantasies about schoolgirls is considered to be unacceptable, because some other societies think that could lead to them acting out, and that could end up being a problem. So in a lot of other societies, they don't accept sexual images of schoolgirls because it's unacceptable. In Japan, it's mainstream. See it on TV, you know, schoolgirls in their underwear kissing each other. You know, there's an AKB48 film clip of, you know, all these girls that are supposed to be schoolgirls in their underwear lying on a big bed kissing each other. You know, it's okay because it's fantasy. So, you know, here's the difference in Japan between fantasy and reality. The fantasy's okay, but if you do it in reality, you'll go to jail, because, you know, the law in Japan, state by state, is either 18 or 19 or 20. So, you know, grown men having relationships with schoolgirls is illegal, you go to jail, but it's okay to have the fantasy. So there's the fantasy and the reality. So we've got the fantasy and the reality, and then we've also got the image. So the reality and the image are often different as well. So one example of that would be the fact that people aren't supposed to have sex outside marriage. So before they're married, they're not supposed to be having sex, you know. And the image is supposed to be that girls are supposed to be virgins when they get married and all that sort of stuff. So the image is that nobody's fooling around. And they don't talk about it so openly, you know. I know in Australia, a lot of the places I worked in Australia, people would come there on Monday morning and talk about what they did on the weekend, you know, sometimes in massive detail, you know. But here that's not so common, you know. People don't talk about that sort of stuff, you know. They pretend, most of them, not everybody, but most of them pretend, you know. And so the image in Japan is that people don't have sex unless they're married. The reality is that there's tens of thousands of love hotels, you know, and I think a love hotel is a classic example. There's the You know, people who aren't supposed to be, usually it's people who aren't supposed to be, as far as society's concerned, they aren't supposed to be together alone in a room having sex, you know, nuding up in a room. So, you know, that might be because they're young and they're not married yet. It might be because they're married to somebody else. That's quite common. Or for any other reason that they have to go off to a hotel. And love hotels protect their privacy. You know, love hotels are designed. There's a video about love hotels on the accommodation playlist, I think. But love hotels are designed to protect the privacy. You know, people driving in their car and the door closes behind them so nobody sees their car in there. And you know, they enter the room through a private entrance so that nobody sees them in there. And love hotels are extreme on privacy, you know, keeping people's privacy, because Japanese people want to maintain the image. You know, they don't want so the image is that they're not fooling around. You know, the image is that they're a happily married person, and they want to maintain that image. But the reality is that they're going to love hotels on the weekend with somebody else, or they're going to love hotels during their lunch break with someone else. And interestingly too, you know, in a lot of other societies, if someone's fooling around, their partner wants to catch them out. You know, if the partner suspects they're fooling around, they want to catch them. And they think they're fooling around, they want to catch them, they want to find out. And they'll ask them, tell me what you're doing, I want to know the truth, you know. In Japanese society, it's pretty much, the deal is that if somebody's got a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a husband or a wife and they go and cheat, that's okay as long as they don't get caught. And that's okay as long as the partner never finds out. And that's the attitude. And even the partner will have that attitude. That if their wife or husband or boyfriend or girlfriend's fooling around, that's okay. They just don't want to know about it. And you know, in some societies, if you fool around and then go and tell your partner, that's the right thing to do. Oh, look, I'm sorry, I had a weak moment, I went and fooled around with someone else. Here, it's the wrong thing to do because it's rubbing their nose in it. And it's because it's the difference between the reality and the image. And this is the thing, is that in Japanese society, maintaining the image. So the image is what's on the surface. So the image is what's on the surface. The image is that you have a happy marriage. That's the image. And the reality or the fantasy or whatever else is happening is invisible, and all we want to see is the image. And it's the same as with people individually here. You know, the emotion thing, and this is very common, most people know this, that, you know, showing negative emotion in Japan is really bad. So if you're unhappy, you don't show it. It's very uncool to show it, very uncivilized. If you're unhappy or if you're angry, if you've got any sort of negative emotion at all, that's the reality. The reality is you're unhappy, or the reality is you're pissed off, or the reality is whatever it is. But that's not important. The most important thing is the image. The image is that you're happy and everything's okay. So this is very difficult, or it can be very difficult. And a lot of the other topics that we've already talked about on the how-to playlist, you'll recognise fit into this system, or into this way of thinking, is with the three things, with the fantasy, the reality and the image. And number one has to be the image. And this is very difficult for a lot of people. And you know, when I make the videos on the how-to playlist, lots of people say, oh, I can't do that, I have to be honest, or whatever, right? Because in a lot of societies, the reality is the most important. You know, the reality of what's happening, and the honesty and the reality is what's most important. Whereas in Japanese society, the image is what's most important. And lots of stuff that happens here that's difficult for foreigners. A lot of the stuff that happens here is difficult for Japanese people. That's another thing too. A lot of the things that foreigners say is difficult for them here, it's difficult for Japanese people too. You know, I've got lots of examples of that, where I've had a topic that I've been researching because I want to talk to you guys about it. So I've started to ask a few Japanese people about stuff gently when there's no one else around. You know, tell me about love hotels. What's the deal there, you know? And it often comes back to this, that they'll explain it by saying to me, oh, but that's, you know, that's a secret, so it's okay. So the reality is hidden. You know, if there's a bad reality, it's okay if you hide it. Interestingly, recently I made a video about people breaking the road rules in Japan, saying that, you know, usually Japanese people are very law-abiding, but, you know, they're happy to break the road rules. That seems to be acceptable here. And some of you guys would have seen it. Well, 6,000 of you saw it, or 8,000 of you saw it. and it showed I didn't protect anybody. I showed everybody breaking the road rules, and there was some people driving around with kids standing on their passenger seats, and I didn't make any attempt to hide the people at all because, I have no respect for people that risk children's lives. And interestingly, Japanese people complained that I'd infringed on their privacy, which I thought was interesting, because usually nobody complains about filming in public, and there's lots of videos on YouTube that have been filmed in public, and usually nobody complains. But instead of people saying, isn't it terrible those people are risking those children's lives, and isn't it terrible, they should have those children in seatbelts and they should be more careful, they didn't react like that. They reacted by complaining to YouTube that I'd infringed on their privacy. So YouTube, like YouTube does, just told me to take the video down. So I did. My point is that, again, I did the wrong thing. As far as they're concerned, I did the wrong thing by showing the reality. And that was bad, because the image is that everybody does the right thing and that people don't break any rules. So I was rude enough to show the reality, and the reality is they do break the rules, and there's people standing on the seats of the cars and all that sort of thing. They didn't like it. Or, that's, that person, the most important thing was the secret. Hide the reality and maintain the illusion, and I didn't do that, and I showed the people doing the wrong thing, and that's the opposite of what love hotels are about, and it's the opposite of what a lot of Japanese society is about. So, when you come here, you'll find a lot of stuff fits into this category, and some of us come from societies where truth and reality are good, where, if you're saying the truth, and if you're looking at the reality of a situation, that's considered to be good, whereas here, quite often, that's not the case, and that can be really difficult. So I think we have to keep in mind when we live here that the image is the most important thing, the illusion. And there's a million examples of this. There's a lot of unhappy marriages here. Statistically, we know there's a lot of unhappy marriages here, like there is in every country, but you don't see examples of it here. And if you have two people, if you're in a group and there's two people in the group that don't like each other, and that, it's very rare to see it. Even if that person doesn't like that person, and they really don't like each other, you wouldn't know it to look at them, because they both maintain the image, they both maintain the illusion, and that's the most important thing. Maintain the image and the illusion that everything's good, that there's no problems, that everybody's happy, that everything's the way it should be, that there's nobody breaking any rules, that nobody's doing the wrong thing, there's no problem, it's all harmonious and it's all cool, even if it's not. So it is difficult. Sometimes it's really difficult. I mean, it makes it a really nice place to live, because the illusion and the image is everything's fine. Where it can be difficult for people is where the reality is not good, but you have to hide it and pretend that that reality is not actually happening, and that the image and the illusion is all okay. So it can be difficult. And it also explains the way they see the fantasy thing. There's a lot of examples of that here, where I've said to people, how come this is okay? How come this is okay? And they say, oh, it's because it's fantasy. It's because it's fantasy, that's okay. And the reality, that's just fantasy. So there's the fantasy, here's the reality, and here's the illusion and the image, and the illusion and the image is the most important thing. Maintain the illusion and the image. So, when we come here, we have to pretend everything's fine, we're happy with everything. And even when people know, you'll get 2 people or 10 people or 100 people or a whole country of people that all know that the reality is different. And if you get some, you shouldn't ever point out the fact that, hey, look, everybody's saying that this is the reality, but it's not. This is the reality. And sometimes everybody knows. Everybody knows that the reality is different from the illusion, but nobody's going to break it, because that's really uncivilized. It's really uncivilized, to say to people, well, hey, wait a minute, if everybody's, if they're all happily married and stuff, how come he goes to love hotels on the weekend? Oh, So, yeah. So, look, keep your eye out for any sort of society stuff or any sort of interesting stuff about Japan. Quite often you'll find this explains it, the fantasy, the reality, the illusion, the image. The illusion and the image is the thing on the surface that's most important. Reality and the fantasy is all whatever. None of them way. Anything is okay. So anyway, something to think about. More videos coming soon.